A lot of people will never take advantage of God's abundant resources. In Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20, it says that God is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we could ask or think. Unfortunately, the problem is that we just don't tap into those abundant resources that God has made available to us. The verses just before this is one of Paul's prayers for the church. In Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 through 19, he says, "For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name, that he would grant you according to the riches of his glory to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in the inner man, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, and that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled up to all the fullness of God." Paul first prays that we be strengthened in the inner man. When we get up in the morning, we shower, we shave, we get dressed, we make sure our hair looks nice. We spend a lot of time on the outer man. But what about the inner man? Our inner man needs that same attention. Paul then prays that Christ would dwell in our hearts through faith. That word dwell, it's a word that means Christ takes up residence. He feels at home in your life. This, in reality, has to do with Christ being Lord of your life. He must be in control. Paul then goes on to pray that we would be able to comprehend and to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge. Basically, Paul prays that we would understand something that we're not able to understand. That understanding would go beyond the mere religious grasp of things to a personal, intimate, growing, overwhelming experience of God. It's like Paul takes us out on a dark night and he tells us, look up at the stars and look at the vastness of the universe. And he says, God's love for you is bigger than all that. It's quite amazing that we would be able to understand the surpassing greatness and overwhelming love of God for us, something that we certainly don't deserve. But he loves you and he loves me just the same. And finally, Paul prays that we would be filled up to all the fullness of God. I think maybe this little story would help you understand what that means. A little girl comes home from Sunday school and she asks her mom, "Mom, if God is bigger than we are, and if God lives within us, then shouldn't God show through?" And I think that's the point. We should be so full of God that he shows through. This was Paul's prayer for the church and his prayer for you, that you would tap into the vast abundance of God's resources and be filled up with God and his love.